The Keturah Enigma, Abraham's third wife and the Ethiopian connection. Establishing the facts. Who is Keturah? Before embarking on a historical investigation, we must anchor ourselves in what the biblical text explicitly states. Keturah emerges in the narrative during the twilight of Abraham's life, stepping into a household that had been completely transformed by loss and time. The context of Abraham's isolation. To truly appreciate Keturah's arrival, we must look at the profound vacuum left in Abraham's household. Years prior, Hagar, his Egyptian concubine, had been permanently sent away into the wilderness of Paran, Genesis 21. Following this, Sarah, his lifelong wife, passes away at Hebron, Genesis 23. Finally, Isaac marries Rebekah and moves into his late mother's tent, finding personal comfort after his bereavement, Genesis 24 verse 67. Abraham is left entirely alone. His first wife is dead, his Egyptian partner is exiled, and his primary heir has started his own household. It is precisely in this state of deep isolation that Genesis 25 verse 1 opens. Abraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah. The 6 sons and their historical impact. While Genesis 25 verse 1 calls her a wife, 1 Chronicles 1 verse 32 lists her as a concubine, indicating her children were legitimate but would not inherit the primary spiritual covenant reserved strictly for Isaac. Genesis 25 verse 2 states she bore Abraham's 6 sons, Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Before we look into Keturah's identity, we must recognize that several of these sons played massive, active roles across the biblical landscape. Midian. By far the most famous, his descendants, the Midianites, become a major geopolitical player. They would later buy Joseph from his brothers, Genesis 37 verse 28, and their territory would become the backdrop for Moses' exile, Shua. His descendants formed the Cushite tribe. This is highly significant because Bildad the Cushite, one of Job's 3 famous companions, likely hailed from this line, Job 2 verse 11, embedding Keturah's legacy into biblical wisdom literature. Jokshan. He became the father of Sheba and Dedan, names heavily tied to the ancient, wealthy trade networks of the southern desert. To secure Isaac's future. Genesis 25 verse 6 states that Abraham gave these sons gifts and sent them eastward, into the East Country, the vast Arabian Peninsula.
The apocryphal fusion, Hagar, Keturah, and the genesis of the Arabs, with Hagar sent away and Sarah dead. A clear pattern begins to emerge in how Abraham's household interacts with the ancient world. Long before Keturah arrived, the Bible explicitly defined the background of Abraham's first concubine. Hagar was an Egyptian, Genesis 16 verse 1. This single fact establishes a clear, undisputed branch of Abrahamic descendants tied directly to Northeast African Hamitic roots. When we turn to extra-biblical literature to see what happened to these lineages over time, a fascinating ethnic convergence occurs. The Book of Jubilees provides deep commentary on how these families shifted geographically. According to texts like Jubilees 11 to 12 and 20, the descendants of Ishmael, Hagar's son, and the 6 sons of Keturah did not live in complete isolation from one another. Instead, as they moved into the desert regions, their paths crossed, and they eventually integrated. The text of Jubilees notes that they intermarried and co-settled the vast wilderness territory stretching from Paran all the way to the entry of Babylon. Most notably, Jubilees explicitly asserts that this very fusion of Ishmaelites and Keturahites formed the original Arab tribes. This creates a brilliant point of comparison for our investigation. If Hagar provided a clearly documented African bloodline to Ishmael's side of the family, a compelling question naturally follows. What did Keturah bring to her 6 sons? Did Abraham once again reach into the same powerful southern networks? This is a perfect pivot point where we move from explicit, written narrative into the realm of historical deduction.
The deductive investigation was Keturah an Ethiopian? Because the canonical scriptures do not explicitly state Keturah's nation of origin, we are left to look for clues hidden within the ancient genealogies. We are not presenting this theory as an absolute, dogmatic certainty, but rather as a compelling historical possibility based on a massive textual anomaly that demands an explanation. The riddle of the duplicate names. If you cross-reference the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 with the Keturah lineage in Genesis 25, you encounter an intentional, mirror-image duplication of names across entirely different branches of humanity. In Genesis 10, the Hamitic line, we learn that Cush, the ancient biblical word for Ethiopia/Northeast Africa, is the father of Rama, who then fathers Sheba and Dedan. Havilah is also listed as a direct son of Cush. In Genesis 25, the Keturah line, we are told that Abraham and Keturah father Jokshan, who then fathers two sons named Sheba and Dedan. A plausible and elegant solution. How can Sheba and Dedan be both grandsons of Hamitic Cush and grandsons of Semitic Keturah? One very strong position a scholar can take is that Keturah herself may have been a Cushite, an Ethiopian woman. In the ancient Near East, marriage was deeply tied to alliance and trade. When a patriarch married a woman from a powerful foreign clan, it was common practice for her children and grandchildren to carry names that honored the mother's ancestral line. This preserved political and commercial ties. If we look at it through this lens, it is highly plausible that Keturah's son Jokshan named his children Sheba and Dedan to maintain an active relationship with the wealthy Cushite trading empires of East Africa. This perspective beautifully explains why these identical, highly specific names cross the boundary between Hamitic and Semitic lines, weaving the footprint of Cush directly into the tent of Abraham.
The scriptural paradox. Did Moses have two wives? If we embrace the possibility that Keturah possessed an Ethiopian identity, we suddenly find ourselves holding a potential key to one of the most fiercely debated relationship mysteries in the entire Torah. It centers around a single, glaring question. Did Moses have two wives, or did he marry only once? The clash of the texts. The Bible presents us with a striking narrative contradiction that has puzzled theologians for centuries. The Exodus account. In Exodus 2, Moses flees Egypt, arrives in the land of Midian, and marries Zipporah, the daughter of a Midianite priest. The Numbers account. Years later, in Numbers 12:1, a family feud erupts. Miriam and Aaron openly oppose Moses, and the text gives a shocking reason, for he had married a Cushite woman. As you read this, the mystery deepens. Cushite in the ancient world explicitly meant a person from Cush, the region of ancient Ethiopia and northeast Africa. So, how do we reconcile this? One school of thought takes the text literally and insists Moses must have had two separate wives, Zipporah the Midianite from Arabia, and an unnamed Ethiopian woman whom he married either before or after. But is that the only conclusion? Is it possible that these two seemingly different identities belong to the exact same woman? The hidden poetic key in Habakkuk. This is where our investigation brings us back to Keturah. If we look closely at the prophetic poetry of Habakkuk 3 verse 7, the lines between Ethiopia and Midian begin to blur in a fascinating way. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Habakkuk is using a classic style of ancient Hebrew poetry known as parallelism, where the second line repeats the exact same concept as the first line using different words. Here, the prophet treats Cushan, Cush/Ethiopia, and Midian as interchangeable, identical entities. When we trace the genealogy back to the facts we established in Genesis, the puzzle pieces fall into place. Midian was the biological son of Keturah. If Keturah was an Ethiopian woman, then her son Midian carried that African bloodline into the desert of Arabia. Over generations, his descendants, the Midianites, would be both Midianite by geography and Cushite by maternal bloodline. By framing it this way, the mystery of Moses' marriage takes on a beautiful new dimension. Moses didn't need to have two wives. Zipporah could easily have been a Midianite to the eyes of Exodus, but a Cushite to the eyes of Numbers, all because she was a direct descendant of Abraham and his Ethiopian wife, Keturah.
The Red Sea Highway and the prophetic horizon. This theory challenges the modern idea that ancient geographic boundaries were completely rigid. The Red Sea was not an impassable wall separating the sons of Ham from the sons of Shem. It was a flourishing maritime highway. The Queen of Sheba, a dual legacy. This fluid interaction explains why the identity of the Queen of Sheba remains heavily contested. Ethiopia claims her as Queen Makeda of the Aksumite Empire, while Middle Eastern traditions claim her as a monarch of the Sabaean kingdom in Yemen. It is highly probable that both traditions hold truth, representing a unified commercial kingdom that straddled both sides of the Red Sea due to generations of Cushite and Abrahamic intermarriage. The prophet Isaiah's caravan, connecting Midian, Ephah, and Sheba. If we want definitive biblical proof that Keturah's descendants and the wealthy kingdoms of Sheba remained structurally linked throughout history, we find it in the prophetic poetry of Isaiah 60 verse 6. Looking forward to a future era of global restoration, Isaiah describes a massive, unified merchant caravan streaming into Jerusalem. The multitude of camels shall cover your land, the dromedaries of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba shall come, they shall bring gold and incense. Isaiah 60 verse 6. Consider the brilliant genealogical continuity here. Midian is Keturah's son, and Ephah is her biological grandson via Midian, Genesis 25 verse 4. Centuries after the book of Genesis was closed, Isaiah deliberately pairs Keturah's children, Midian and Ephah, in the exact same commercial caravan as Sheba. This strongly supports the position that the lines of Keturah and the empires of Sheba were never separate. They moved, traded, and existed as a singular Afro-Arabian network. The end times mystery of Sheba and Dedan. This exact same geographic and genealogical puzzle follows us all the way into end times prophecy. In Ezekiel 38, a massive northern coalition prepares for a global conflict. Amidst this geopolitical chaos, two specific entities, Sheba and Dedan, step into the light. Rather than joining the invasion, they stand back as neutral observers, asking a single, probing question. Have you come to take a spoil? Have you gathered your company to take a prey? Ezekiel 38 verse 13. But who exactly are the Sheba and Dedan questioning this invasion? Prophetic scholars are divided, and the text leaves us with three compelling positions. The Keturah lineage. One school of thought suggests these are the literal, physical descendants of Abraham and Keturah via Jokshan. From this viewpoint, they act as a diplomatic, Abrahamic buffer zone in the Arabian desert. Distant relatives of Israel who refused to participate in her destruction. The Cushite lineage. Another valid position points directly back to Genesis 10, where Sheba and Dedan are the grandsons of Cush. This position is significantly strengthened by looking at Ezekiel 27 verse 22, where Ezekiel explicitly pairs Sheba with Rama, who is uniquely named as the Cushite father of Sheba, and Dedan in the Table of Nations. By referencing these specific regional names, Ezekiel may very well be highlighting the ancient, native African kingdoms of Cush, viewing them as a totally separate, non-Abrahamic trade empire protecting its own sovereign commercial interests, the converged neutral ground. A third perspective argues that by Ezekiel's era, the two bloodlines had completely fused. Because of centuries of migration and trade across the Red Sea, the Hamitic Cushites and the Semitic Keturahites had blended into a singular, hybrid merchant people. They carry the names of Africa, but live the lifestyles of Arabia. Ezekiel does not solve the mystery for us. Whether they speak with the voice of Abraham's forgotten children or the voice of ancient Ethiopia's merchant kings, Sheba and Dedan remain a fascinating, neutral question mark on the prophetic horizon. Checker flag conclusion, a unified house. Keturah's identity remains a brilliant biblical mystery. While Scripture does not give us a definitive birth certificate, the convergence of Genesis, the Book of Jubilees, and Habakkuk paints a vivid picture. Presenting Keturah as an Ethiopian woman is not an absolute dogma, but a highly grounded, logical position that perfectly bridges the worlds of Shem and Ham. It proves that the footprint of Cush extended far deeper into the family of Abraham and the destiny of biblical prophecy than history often remembers.